holidays can be very difficult for those of us who are in or have been in a narcissistically abusive relationship. In this episode, Tara and I delve into why this time of year can be so triggering, why so many survivors and victims who've been in a relationship with a narcissist and other toxic people have learned to be extra cautious because of their dislike of celebrations. And instead of the self-help tip, Tara announced that she's launched a new podcast called The ADHD Couple, where her and her husband explores all the issues related to couples living with ADHD. Thank you for joining us on Breaking Free from Narcissistic Abuse. I'm Dr. Kerry McAvoy, a mental health specialist with over 20 years of counseling experience.
And I'm Tara Blair Ball, a certified relationship coach.
This is a listener-supported podcast. Please consider becoming a supporter of the show for less than a cup of coffee. You can see a link in the show notes below. So we're heading into the holiday seasons, and I've been hearing a lot from my club membership that this is a rough time of the year. There's a lot of triggers. Narcissistically abusive relationships tend to have oddities around this time of year, like rules around giving or how they spend money, or often the narcissist becomes depressed and unavailable. Maybe they become sulky or excessively angry. So it's interesting that this is a common problem. I don't have a lot of triggers this time of year. I mean, I was in that relationship only for a couple years, so it wasn't like we had a big, huge tradition established for me to feel kind of anxious this time of year. But I wondered if that's something you're struggling with, or if you've heard other people struggling with.
It's something I did struggle with for a long time. As we've talked about in a previous episode, I always really struggled around big events, holidays, because that was often a time where the narcissist in my life would be very unpredictable and usually bring some degree of chaos, whether it was good or bad. More often than not, it was bad. But usually the holidays were a time where I just felt very tense and was bracing for something bad to happen and trying to ward it off before it officially blew up. I always felt during the holidays that it was a very lonely time, that there wasn't, you're kind of trapped. I felt really trapped with family for a long time, and my family was where my narcissist was. And then I'm having to spend usually time around other narcissists or other very toxic, unhealthy people because they also happen to be members of my family. So it just was a really sucky time. And I remember always seeing these people who seemed really happy spending time with their families around the holidays, and always feeling really sad and grieved that I didn't have that same experience.
Yeah, my dad would get blue. Usually my dad had to take a second job because there wasn't enough money to buy gifts. So he would be gone all the time between farming, which slowed down in the winter time. But between what little farming he had to do, but he would also go over and start to work for my uncle who had a auto repair shop. So that was a way he came into extra money in order for him to be able to spend. I think it was hard for me was because we were so poor that the most of my gifts would be clothes, because I had probably grown from the start of from the start of school. And so I was needing new clothes to kind of tide me over to the end of the school year. But for me personally, I think maybe it was my autism, but I just sort of checked out of the larger context and focused on my own desires, my own needs. In fact, I would pretty routinely, when I got fed up at my one grandparents' house, which was only 2 miles from where I lived, I would get up and walk home. And I didn't really care what kind of weather I was walking home in. I just preferred to be alone and kind of decompressing. I think the other thing is, and this is something it just hit me as I'm saying all of this. One of the reasons I would want to leave that house is because the person who had assaulted me as a young child was home and was living there. And so being around the person who had betrayed me so severely was very uncomfortable. So I just wanted out of there as fast as I could, because we as a family were living in a state of denial that this person had done these horrible things. And how stressful to be a child coping with being around your perpetrator and having to navigate holidays. So I would get through the dinner, maybe hang around kind of politely long enough, and then I would head home as a result of that. But I was a loner. So for me, the holidays was just a time that I would focus on the beauty of the season, and I love the trees and the decorations that we put up, and the trees meaning the snow in the trees, and I just loved the fact that it was snowing and how gorgeous that was, and I really enjoyed the Christmas tree decorations, and I love holiday music, so all of that just was something I focused on. What I'm hearing though is that, and I know this is true. In fact, I don't. Did you see FX's series, The Bear?
I saw the first season.
Okay,
which was wonderful.
Okay,
very intense.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
yeah. Well, I finished season 2, and season 2, episode 6 is called the Seven Fishes. It's a Christmas tradition some families have where they have this meal, and it's a flashback. It's a self-contained episode, so people could watch it and not watch the whole series if they wanted to. It just stands by itself. And it's this flashback of what this family survived growing up in this highly toxic home. And the father is not there, but the mom is there. And the mom is working up for a breakdown. You can feel it, that everybody knows that mom is getting herself, they're even talking about it, like what stage is mom at, and before the terrible eruption happens. And then they, of course, finally sit down for the dinner. And as a family, it starts to like talk about how thankful they are for the meal. She loses it. It happens. This thing that everybody's been dreading happens. And I have a feeling that that's what a lot of people are going through, that the holidays for them is just this, it takes whatever they're surviving, the eggshells they've been walking on, and then times it by 100 because of the financial pressure, because of the narcissist's negative mood, because of the family expectations, and try to navigate all of that, the extra work, all of that. And then it's building until there's a massive eruption. And the other thing I see is that people who are more emotionally immature hate seeing people be happy. And how much more of a triggering time for them than these holidays, which supposedly we're all in a good space. So I think sometimes they just love to shit on what's special. So I know for a lot of people, this is a really, really rough time.
Yeah, I can really relate to a lot of that, especially your description of the episode of The Bear, because that was literally, it felt like every holiday in my childhood. It was just waiting, just braced and tensed and anxious and waiting for whatever shit was going to happen. And you can't enjoy the present. I mean, you said you liked looking at the Christmas trees and the decorations. Mm-hmm. That was not a part of my life until I reclaimed holidays for myself and part of my recovery work. I could not see that without having that negative, overwhelming feeling of, oh God, oh God, what's going to happen this time? It's going to be bad. I would dread holidays for that reason, because I knew it was it's a lot of time off school or off work, and I'm spending time around people where blowups are inevitable to happen. I can't predict or stop or alleviate them. It was just going to happen. And I hated it. I hated feeling trapped there out of duty or obligation, or the fact that I was a child and I didn't have options to just walk away. There wasn't anywhere to go.
Right.
So, and as an adult, I still felt that same sense, because when I was married to the narcissist, it was very much all the expectations of go see this family, go see that family. We have to stay a certain amount of hours. We have to just be there, and trying to play nice around people who are just going to talk badly about me as soon as I walk out of the room. It just, I did not feel free of any of that sort of dread and anxiety until either the holiday season was over or I too was alone.
Right.
And then whenever I was alone, I just felt unbearable amounts of grief because I knew that this wasn't how it was supposed to be. That's not how I wanted it to be. It sucked. Yeah. And some of that was some unreasonable expectations. I can't expect a narcissist to play nice every holiday. Like that's setting yourself up for disappointment constantly. So unreasonable expectations about the person that I was with and the people I was around, but also just unreasonable expectations because of how much I didn't have control over those situations. Yeah. And when I was able to finally leave and make choices and be intentional about that, it's a totally different experience for me today. I really love the holiday season at this time of my life. My kids are at the age where it's all fun and exciting, and they love looking at decorations and decorating. And that has been a big reclaiming for me. And that started as soon as I left the narcissist. My kids were just my kids weren't even 2 when I left the narcissist, but that first Christmas, it still was sad, because I was just a single mom. I couldn't necessarily afford a lot, but I still really worked on making it special. And for me, that also was a healing process for me of being able to give someone else what was never given to me.
Yeah, that's so cool. I love that you're doing that. I think it's really amazing. In that episode of The Bear, they showed different family members reacting differently to the situation. And it hit me just this week. I don't know why I'd never put it together before, but the reactions that we develop that carry into adulthood are actually characterizations of the fight, flight, fawn, or freeze modes that we begin to, it becomes part of our personality. So let me give you an example of what I mean. If you're a fawner, you know that caretaking and checking in with whoever's being out of control and just sort of easing the situation, it's really easy then as an adult to become a people pleaser or codependent or somebody who's just is super like a parentified person. I know that I was highly parentified in my family. Or say that you're a fleer. It's just easy for you to learn to either literally never be at the situations or be the person who's hanging off in the corner, or you might be the person who's dissociating. You're sitting there and literally just dissociating and you're there, but not really there. If you're the fighter, you may be picking fights with everybody around there and just being antagonistic and irritable and very difficult. But can you see how these sort of carry in? And that hit me when I realized that, because I realized that I tend to either freeze or I'm busy trying to, like I shared about that Thanksgiving story, or I'm going over the top trying to make this extra special, hoping that people feel seen and loved, which, hey, I mean, my dad, all he needed was a can of cranberries, dumped into a bowl, and he was happy. And here I'm doing all this extreme efforts to make this a perfect, down to ironing or linen napkins that I didn't need to get out or use. So it's interesting how these can become ingrained habits of ours.
And not serve us anymore, but we continue to do that.
Exactly.
I definitely still can find myself fawning. That's absolutely my sort of default, is going back to fawning, as trying to make everything perfect, trying to be overly controlling and overly managing. And that's why not having unreasonable expectations and letting things be and trying to find joy in just how they are is such huge progress for me. It is.
Yeah. It's so much work. Right now, I've been dating and I've been seeing somebody a few times, and I'm already feeling the way that I typically approach a relationship. I'm starting to approach the relationship the same way. And I know that I tend to do that with holidays. I tend to do that wherever there's really big triggers. I tend to fall back into my MO. And so one of the things I'm realizing that I'm not doing when I get into these stressful situations is that I don't share how I'm actually feeling. I start to act like the situation is on ice and that I need to be very careful, step carefully. And then I begin to hold myself back so that I don't somehow make things worse. But what's happening is I'm not really being myself. That's sort of a betrayal of me. And, when you're meeting somebody new, they don't really get to experience you because they're experiencing you taking care of them. Or even with my family doesn't get the benefit of me just being, naturally me, hanging loose and laughing at stuff. If I'm scanning the room, making sure everybody's not unhappy, then I can't really be present. So that's one of the things I'm trying to work on. And so I guess I'd love to hear, if somebody's resonating with that, how can we become more present, more emotionally present? Do you have some thoughts about that? I've been trying to think about what that looks like for me too.
Yeah, I've had very similar situations, especially dating. Yeah. When I think back to that, I remember one instance where I was in a car with my now husband, and it was early on dating, and he just was complimenting me. And I don't even know what he was complimenting me on. Maybe something I was doing, maybe my looks, I don't know. But I remember sitting in the car and I reached up to hold that handle and I was like, I'm just going to jump out of the car.
Wow.
I need to get out of here. I feel suffocated. Get me out of this car.
Oh man. Wow.
Yeah. And that is because any time in those narcissistically abusive relationships where someone was nice to me, overly nice, it came at a price. It came at a cost that I didn't want to pay.
So you were like, when's the shoe going to fall?
Was going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. When's the shoe going to fall here?
Yeah. When when is it going to happen? And so I'm like bracing for it. And I just had that, it was just this panic where I was like, get me out of here. And the only way that I learned in that particular situation, I did not handle it the way I would have liked in that particular situation. I just froze and just didn't speak and just kept thinking about how I just needed to get out of that vehicle as quickly as possible. As I talked to him about it later, I had a conversation of, hey, it was really hard for me when you were complimenting me. It was really uncomfortable for me, and he was like, well, why? I think those things, like, why would it make you comfortable if I'm telling you these nice things? And I had to walk it back and reflect on, well, why did I? Why did I? And share that. And it helped him understand a little bit more about me as an abuse survivor and an abuse victim. And it also helped us sort of move through that when he complimented me later, I didn't have that same kind of panic.
Yeah.
Because I saw what had happened where he had given me a compliment and nothing happened afterward.
Right.
It helped to build that faith and predictability that I would need in a healing relationship. And I think that's hard for a lot of us, is being able to share with people who are safe and build on that. I think too much of the problem of my previous dating and relationship life is I had tried to share those things with people who were unsafe, who would then punish me, use it against me. And so I was taught in those situations, you can't share. But if I'm going to try to be different, for one, I have to choose safe people, and I have to still try to do the same thing and build on it.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm realizing one thing that I'm doing that was a aha was I started finding myself talking about the other person. They're doing this. They said this. What's going on with them when this happens? What are they thinking about? And when that focus of outside, to me, is a sign that I'm trying to control the external environment to manage something inside of me. So now I'm having to sit back and think, okay, so what was I feeling in those moments that's making me want to focus on the exterior? So I'm just using listening to myself as a cue that I'm doing that I'm not saying how I feel. But here's the other problem. I'm realizing, and I think a lot of people struggle with this, I don't even know how to share how I feel, especially in a stressful situation. That's a skill a lot of us, you have to learn how to do that. So I've been, it's funny because I spend all this time with clients teaching them how to do that. And I know how to do it in super safe situations. But it's amazing how it's like my brain falls out and I can't think how to do it when I'm stressed. So I'm having to imagine situations and play them out and imagine what I could say that would be authentic, that would be like to say, I'm not comfortable with that. That's a simply versus some more caretaking thing, which might be, well, that might work, but have we thought, you know what I'm saying? Where you're doing all this analysis of the situation. So when I'm literally having to practice in my head these scenarios.
Yeah. What I was going to say is I had to learn to say, let me think about it. Let me think about it. So it'd give me that time to leave, pause, reflect, and get back to the person. Right. But what was also the most beneficial for me is sending that information in text.
Yeah, I know. I've thought of that. I have thought of
that. That was literally how I first learned to do that kind of stuff, is because I needed that distance. Yeah. I needed someone to not be looking me straight in the eye. I needed to just sort of hide behind a screen to send that, But that was how I started, of I really felt blank about blank. And it that helped me beginning. Yeah. Because I was so baby at sharing that kind of stuff.
Oh, me too. But I'm thinking even at the holidays, say so-and-so wants you to come over to their house. You don't really have time. The kids are going to be tired. It's the wrong time of the day. Maybe you've already eaten twice that day and you don't want to eat again. But that might be a moment where you can say, that's not going to work, but I really appreciate the offer. I mean, I'm thinking about, why do they always have to do this? Don't they think about the fact that this isn't going to work? I mean, that's what we often do. We focus on all the stuff we don't like outside of ourselves. We just could simply say, thanks for the invitation, but it just isn't going to work with our family. It's a bad time. And that would be more authentic. You're present. You're expressing what you think and feel in that moment. Now, it's not a lot of feelings, but it's at least being, present.
Yeah. I was also thinking just at this time of year, how much more self-care that I have to do as a recovering narcissistic abuse survivor. It's a lot less today, but still it's a lot. I can find myself easily getting overwhelmed and neglecting my own needs. And that's when I get into such a bad place. Yeah. Because in those narcissistically abusive relationships, I always entirely neglected myself and never prioritized things that I needed to do for me. And I've found myself having to do that again. Like I've gotten into a habit again of eating standing up. And that was a big part of all those narcissistically abusive relationships is I would just be like shoveling food in my mouth in front of the refrigerator. I just wouldn't sit down to eat. And that's a sign that I'm not doing well, that I'm overwhelmed. And literally before this call, I had that, I was eating breakfast standing up and I was like, what am I doing? Why can't I go sit down?
Right.
Like, just that remembering to do those things for ourselves because we matter and we're worth it. Like I'm worth sitting down and resting while I eat. And when I was in those abusive situations, I never felt like I could.
Yeah. Such a good point. I even think for me, I have to be really practical. I have to anticipate and plan and script out ahead. So I think that might be that's another great suggestion is to say, not only ramp up the self-care, but anticipate where the rough moments are going to be, anticipate who's going to say what, and try to then plan for that so that you have a ready statement that expresses how you're feeling or maybe what you want to do about it or how you're going to blow it off or whatever, but that you're on your feet proactively being assertive versus reactive being crushed, hurt, and going home and then having to lick your wounds. I think that really helps. At least it helps me a lot too. Well, this is a wrapping up for the year. And as a self-help tip, I want to do something a little different. And I know I'm putting you on the spot, but I wonder if you would talk about, because you just launched the ADHD Couple podcast. Why don't you share about that so people who are listening to this can know what else you're doing? Because I think it'd be a lot of help for a lot of people.
Yeah. So I didn't know you were doing this.
I didn't either. I just spontaneously thought this would be a really good idea because I listened to the first episode last night and it's amazing. I really loved it a lot.
Awesome. Thank you. So my husband and I that I've talked a lot on this podcast, we both have ADHD. I actually was just diagnosed with ADHD this year, and he had been diagnosed years before he and I ever met. And I know that ADHD really impacted our relationship, especially once we moved in together, because I just wasn't aware enough of what it meant, what it looked like, how it manifest. And we really had to work through that as a couple. And since being diagnosed myself, I've done so much more research and thinking into how it impacts us. And so we were just sitting down one day and we just decided it would be a good idea to think about how we could help other ADHD couples, whether one or both partners have ADHD, and thinking about it. I work with a lot of couples where one or both people have ADHD and they're not thinking of, oh, my partner didn't do X. That's because they have ADHD.
Right.
They're thinking my partner didn't do X because they're disrespectful or they don't love me. Right. And for my husband and me, we've really had to work on that. And I've personally had to work on it since I wasn't diagnosed until earlier this year. I felt like every time he left cabinet doors open that he was doing it to me. Like, I asked you to close those cabinet doors. Why are you leaving them open? Right. And it felt like he was doing it to me. But ADHD, just like autism that you have, it's like our brain literally is different. And having to approach it and see it differently that way. So every episode, we sort of chit-chat about a different topic. Our first two episodes were about just sort of ADHD in general. The second one was about division of labor. And then we try to give actionable tips to couples where one or both people have ADHD. And honestly, it's been really fun just having that sort of conversation with my husband. He says it's not working, but it feels like working, but it feels fun, breaking free from narcissistic abuse I love it. But it's not I love working with you. That's fun, but it's not necessarily fun because it's some shit. Yeah. We have to deal with some heavy, dark stuff.
It is.
So it's nice to do something a little different.
Yeah. What I liked about it when I listened to the first episode, and I can't wait to listen to the second, was that you guys have a fun dialogue back and forth. And I really appreciate getting a male perspective because so many men are diagnosed with ADHD, but there's not a lot of vocal men who are discussing what the experience is like, particularly in a relationship, what the experience is like. So I really appreciate that dynamic because I don't think that's a common one. So I'm doing a shout out that I think it's an awesome new podcast. And if you guys are looking for support that way, please check out the ADHD Couple podcast with Tara and her husband.
Thank you for joining us today. Have a question or comment? Email us at hello@breakingfreewithkerryandtara.com. If this episode's been helpful, consider becoming a supporter. And if you haven't yet, make sure to follow us at Breaking Free from Narc Abuse on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. We'll see you back here next time.